By the end of this 1-hour course, we will design Notion's website and learn how to create responsive design using Auto Layout. We will also take a look at Figma's dev mode, learn more about color styles, variants, component properties, and expose nested instances. I have combined 4 Auto Layout tutorials in one single video. I also published a source file on the Figma community page. You will learn everything about Auto Layout in 30 steps. Step 1. For this project, we are going to first visit the starter page, and the first section that we are going to recreate is the navigation bar. As you can see, if I hide everything, here on the top side we have a nav bar that has some links. We have the hero section that has 2 text. We have our testimonials. We have another section that is basically a toggle. And finally, we have 4 cards. If we take a look at the right hand side here, we see that we have a color palette that we can use from to basically recreate everything that we see here on the screen. Step 2. So if I toggle back the UI, the first thing we need to do is basically copy this navigation bar and the colors to another page. So let's just go ahead and do that. I would first click on the navigation, Command and C to copy, visit another page, rename this to components, and then I would paste that here. In order for me to create a separation between these two, I can create another page and add 3 dashes, and if I press return on my keyboard, it creates a divider between them. So I can click and drag this. A divider is basically created between them. Also, what I need to do for my navigation is bringing the logo and also creating some color styles, because if I click outside here, you see we don't have any color styles to choose from. So I'll go back to the starter page, click on the Notion logo, copy this, go to the components page, paste that here as well, and then finally I will go to the starter page, copy the colors, and go back to the components page and then paste them here as well. Step 3. So the first thing we need to do is basically recreate colors out of these color palette that we have. What you can do is basically rename them one by one and create color styles, which means you can click on this color, and then if you go ahead and visit the fill section, you can highlight over that 4 dots, select that, click plus, and then here we have the style. And then in this example, we are going to use this for our primary color. So what I can do is rename this to primary, and usually I would rename this based on the lightness, which means if I click on the fill, here we have a lightness of 5. So I would rename this after the /5. And then once I'm done, I would create step 4. And as soon as I click create, here you see on the right hand side we have primary, and then if I click, you see we have the lightness of 5 added. The reason Figma created a folder is because we added the /. So if I have to repeat this for every single one of them, clicking, going to the fill section, clicking plus, and renaming it that way, it might be time consuming. So you can use a plugin to actually generate all of that. And then once you generate the styles, you can actually rename them one by one. This way you can save a couple of clicks by going and applying styles one at a time. So if I click outside and basically delete this, once I delete everything, all I have to do is basically click on my colors, open my layer panel, and then as you can see, they have generic names. So what I can do is I can rename them one by one from the layer panel and then use the plugin to generate the colors. So the way I would categorize them, I would basically select both of these and categorize them as primary. So I would hold Command and R to rename both of them as bulk, and then just type primary and give it a /. By doing that, it would rename both of them as bulk. So I'll click rename, and then I will click on the first one, double click on that, and then just give it a 5. Click on the other one, double click on that. I would give it 94, because if I click on the fill here, you see that the lightness value is 94. So I would basically rename this primary color to 94 as well. So I would highlight both of these as well, Command and R, rename this to secondary and add a /, and then I would click on the first one, and as you can see, if I click on the fill, it is 53 in terms of the lightness. So what you can do is round this up to 50. So here on the secondary, I would just go with 50. If I select the other one, on the HSL value, it is actually being renamed to 93. So we can round this up to 94. And then we have another color here. I would just rename this to tertiary, and then I would give it a /. And then if I go ahead and select the fill, here we see that the lightness is 43. So I would just basically round this to 40. And then finally, this is a white color. And then if I click on the fill, white is always 100% in terms of lightness, which means I would just double click, just give it a gray color, and then / and just give it 100. Step 5. So if I take a look at the left hand side, this is how we renamed our colors. And what we have to do is select all of them, Command and /, and then run a command called generate styles. If you don't see this command, you have to run this plugin first. And the way you would do that is you would go to the plugins, you would search for the plugin called Styler, and then here, this is the plugin that I used. You can click on the 3 dots, view detail, and then if you click run, it gives you a couple of options. So what you can do is run the generate style command. As soon as you run this and and you save this to your plugins, next time you can just basically use command and / and search for generate style, and it would automatically appear for you. So you don't need to click multiple times to get to that. So here I would click on generate style, and here we have 7 styles generated. If I click outside, you see all of the styles are generated for us automatically. So that would save us a ton of time. Instead of us clicking on one of them one by one and renaming them and creating a style, we would just rename them all at once using the / naming convention, and then use the generate style to generate them all as a bulk. So what I can do is just double click that and then just write color renamed and then cut that. I can go back to the starter page and then add that next to this one, so you can have that for your reference. So this way you have the renamed version for your reference. Step 6. So now if I go back to my components page, I can finally start creating the buttons. And the first thing that I need to do is basically add a text on my canvas. The shortcut is T, and then as you can see, as soon as I click T, text is highlighted for me, so I can zoom in, click anywhere, and then just type in link. I'll click outside, hold Shift and A to create an auto layout, and I would double click on that, rename this to link. Also from the auto layout panel, I would give it 12 pixels of padding on left and right, and as well as 8 pixels of padding on top and bottom. And in terms of the border radius, I would go to the appearance and then just give it 4 pixels. You might not see any difference. The reason is we haven't given it a background color. The way you would give it a background color is we would go to our fill, click on that 4 dots, and now we can select colors from our primary color palette. So we would select the 5, and then if we click on the link here, we would select the 100%, which is white. And now if I zoom in, I have my primary link created. What I need to do is create a component out of this. So I would click on that. I would scroll all the way up. Here you see that we have the create component icon. You can always search for that as well. So you can just hold command and / search for create component. And then once you do that, you see the icon is changed. We have our component created. What we need to do is add a text property. The reason we add a text property, it allows us to edit our text when we select our button, which means if I hold option and drag this button out, we have an instance right now. We can tell that this is an instance because if we take a look at the left hand side, the icons are different. And if we take a look at the right hand side, we see we can't change the text. It would be nice if we select the actual link and have the ability to change the text property right from the panel. Step 7. So the way we would do that is we would select the link and select the text inside the link, and we would scroll to the typography section and select this tiny icon, and then here you see we have component property created. So we would rename this to label, and then for the value we would just give it a default value for now, and we would create the property. As soon as we create the property, here you see we have our text property created. So right now if I go back to my instance and select it, if I scroll up, you see we have a property called label, which means we can simply select that and start typing, for example, login. And then as soon as we do that, the actual button would change. Previously, we didn't have this option. Because we created a text property, now we can have the ability to edit the value of the button. Also, we need to create another secondary button. Now we would click on our link, and then as you can see here, we have a different icon, which is called add a variant. If we click on that, Figma creates a variant for us. We can give this variant a background color so we can see it clearly. We can go to the fill section, select the variant, and then just add plus to give it a background color so we can see it better. And if we click the variant and then if we scroll up, Figma gave it a default property. So in order for us to switch between different styles, we have to give it a property name. For example, here we can double click on it, give it a property of color, and then for the value we can give the first one a value of black and the second one a value of white. And then all we have to do right now is go to the second button, which has the value of white, and change the background color. So we revisit the fill section, we change the background color from 5 to 94, and then the text color from 100% to 5. This way we flip the colors. And now if I go ahead and select my button and scroll up, here you see we have color, which is called black and white. And as soon as I switch between them, we have the ability to switch between our links. If you have only 2 values in your variant, what you can do is use true and false values, which means I can click on my first button, and instead of actually having it as black, I would just rename this to true. And I would go on my other one, which is white, and I would rename this to false. And if I go ahead and click on my instance, right now you see I have a toggle, which means I can actually switch between white and black using a custom toggle that I just created. On top of that, I have the ability to change the value and change it at the same time. Since we changed this to toggle, it doesn't make sense to have the property name as color. For example, if the toggle is on, the link is actually turned into black, which means if I go to the link component, I can double click on the color and then rename this to black. As soon as the toggle is set to true, the black color appears. As soon as it's set to false, it switches back to the white. So I can click on that, and then here we see we have black, so we can switch and turn off the black color, and now we're back at the white color. Step 8. Since we have our button created, all we have to do is basically replicate that and replace the text values using the newly created component. So I'll click and drag this, and I need to basically duplicate this multiple times. I can duplicate this by using the Command D shortcut, but at first I would just select that, Shift and A to create an auto layout, rename this to nav, and then I would set the direction from vertical to horizontal, and then in the fill section I would just basically give it a background color of white, which is gray 100. As soon as I select that, here we have our navigation created, and then as you can see, our first button has a bit of a contrast between the background color and the navigation. So what I can do is basically click and drag this, but what you notice is our button is actually being stretched and we don't want that behavior. So what I have to do is basically group the button into two different groups, which means the product, teams, individuals, download and pricing. These would be one group. Demo, login, and get Notion for free, there will be another group, and then finally we have the logo. So let's just go ahead and do that. And in order for us to not confuse these two, I can double click and then just rename this to the wireframe. So we know that this is the wireframe and this is the navigation. And then here on the left hand side, we have the navigation, and then we have the instance, which is the link. I can click on that, Shift and A to create another auto layout, and then I can double click, rename this to right. And I also want to make sure that the direction is set to horizontal. Now if I go ahead and select the auto layout, I want to have this as hug. Also, if I go to my button, I would select that, and instead of fill, I would have this as hug as well. Right now we managed to fix that issue. So all we need to do is basically select the instance, Command and D, and duplicate that 3 times. And that would be the 3 links that we have on the right hand side. Since we renamed this to the right, now we would select the right side, Command and D to duplicate that, double click, rename this to left, and then as you can see, we have 5 links. So we would select the link, Command and D 2 times, so we have 5 links, and then finally we would have the Notion logo. So we would select the Notion logo, Command and C to copy that, we would select our navigation, Command and V to paste that, and then we can double click and rename this to logo. And if I zoom outside and if I try to bring the navigation here, as you can see on the left hand side, we have a navigation, which is an auto layout. We have left and right side, again 2 more auto layouts. And then we have our logo. Since everything is in auto layout, I can use the arrow to move the logo all the way to the left side, and then click on the navigation and drag it all the way. And what I also want is the right navigation to take all the available space and be pushed all the way to the right side. Step 9. In order to fix that, what you need to do is select the parent navigation, and then instead of having the gap as 10, you would select the drop down and have the gap as auto. As soon as we select the auto, here you see that the right side is actually pushed all the way to the edge, the left side is actually placed in the middle, and then the logo is placed all the way to the left side. And then if we click on the navigation here, you see we managed to create a responsive layout. However, we don't want the middle navigation to be always in the middle. Since we renamed this to left, we want this to be close to the Notion, and we only want the right side to be pushed all the way to the right. So in order to fix that, what we need to do is nest auto layout one more time, which means we have to select the left and the logo, create another auto layout, and then here double click, rename this to logo plus left, and then give it a gap of 16, for example. By doing that, we have now a navigation, logo and the left side, and if we open logo and the left side, we have the logo and the left, which is another auto layout, and then we have the right side. If we zoom out, we see that we have our right side as well. So what we can do is resize this, and as you can see, only the right side is being resized proportionately. We only want one of the buttons to be primary, so what I can do is double click on one of the links here and then only turn this into black, and we want the text, basically get Notion for free, to be pasted there. So I would just Command and C to copy that, and then select this one, and instead of sign up, I would just paste get Notion for free. And then as you can see, this is how we are managing to update our links. So what I have to do is copy paste these values one by one into the buttons, so we have our navigation created. Step 10. What you can do is use a plugin to copy the values and select all these buttons and paste them all at once. The plugin that I'm going to use is called Mini Paster. So here I would search for Mini Paster, and then I would open this. What I would do is basically zoom in, select the product teams, and then copy it from the selection. And then here you see that it actually copied everything for me. Now what I have to do is basically select the left side, select all the links within that, press return on my keyboard to select all the individual text, and then click paste data. As soon as I click paste data, here you see all the data is actually being pasted all at once. So I can hide everything on the UI. We managed to create this navigation bar out of our wireframe. And if I go ahead and visit the starter page, here we managed to basically finish the navigation. The next sections that we need to focus on is basically the hero. Step 11. So far we managed to create the navigation. Right now we have to take the hero section and add it just below the navigation. So the first thing that we need to do is for the hero section, we have now with Notion, we do want to turn this into a chip. Chips are basically like buttons, but they're all rounded corner, which means we would exactly have the same button dimension, but everything would be rounded. Also, we would have another color. If we take a look at our colors on the right hand side, here we see we have secondary, which is 94 and 50. This is the secondary color that we want to use. So in order for us to basically create a chip, what we can do is go to the links, hold Option and duplicate. And for our chips, we can rename this the links to chips and then basically highlight both of them. And then if we just drag this a little bit out and scroll down here under appearance, we can just like give it 500 to make sure it is rounded. Also for chips, we don't want it to be 8 pixels because chips are a bit smaller. So we want to reduce the padding from top and bottom from 8 to 4. And since we reduced it, if we take a look at it closer here, we see that it is a bit smaller than the actual button and everything is rounded. So all we have to do is basically select the first chip and go to the fill section. Here on the fill, we have basically primary. We want to switch to secondary. We want to select the text and then again go to the secondary and then select the text color. Also, we have another color. If we take a look at our default and then if we scroll down under fill, we have another color called tertiary. So we can select that and also select the text and then go ahead and select white. After selecting the white, now we have a purple chip, which is a bit lighter, and a blue chip that is a bit darker. Step 12. And finally, we have to reassign the values. If I take a look at the chip component variant, here we have true and false. We exactly want to keep the same values. The only thing is instead of black, we want to turn it into purple. So here we would just rename this to purple and we exactly keep everything the same, which means if I want to test it, I can hold Option and bring one out. And then as you can see right now, instead of black, we have purple. So we can turn it on and off. And then this way we can switch between them. And also we can edit the labels as we type. Not only that, because this variant set is exactly created the same way as the link, if you decide to switch between chip and link, you can click on that and switch between link. And then as you can see, the text is preserved. So you have also the ability to switch between link and your text is preserved. And then by going back to chips, you can switch between them with no problem. This is possible because we have our text component property created as label. And then we linked both of the text on chip side and on the link side all together, which means if I go ahead and, for example, click on this, if I scroll down, you see we have the label all lowercase. If I rename this to something else, the link would be broken between them. So make sure your component text properties are named the same. This way you have easier time doing instant swap and everything would be preserved. For a quick demonstration, if I click on the chip here on the label side, if I double click and just increase the first letter by L, like capital L label, if I click outside, now if I go back to my chip instance, if I click on it and click on the chip, now I want to do a swap to link. Right now you see the text is not preserved. So I'm going to Command Z that. Here I would double click again on the actual master chip component, double click here, making sure that the text component property is exactly written the same way, all lowercase as label, which is exactly the same way as if I click on the link, we have all lowercase written as label. So this way, again, if I do a one final test, if I click on my chip and then just write sign up, and then if I do an instant swap to link, here you see my sign up is preserved and I also have the ability to switch between black and white. I have the ability to switch between purple and blue. Step 13. Since we managed to fix that, we can now move on to basically replacing the chip component with the actual text. In this example, we have now with Notion AI. So what I would do is I would copy that to my clipboard and then I can click on the chip, and on the right hand side, we have the label. So I can Command V that to paste the text inside the label. And as you can see, we have our chip created. Here we have two text values. So what we need to do is just increase the font size and font weight to make them stand out. So what I would do is I would click and drag this outside. We no longer need this, so I can simply delete that. And then I can click on that, move to the typography section and increase the font weight to 61 pixels. Also, I do want this to be center aligned. And if I click on the font weight, I do want this to be extra bold. So now if I zoom out, we basically have Notion with AI that would be placed to the top, and we have the text that is promoting Notion. And on top of that, we have the navigation bar. So what we can do is we can delete the wireframe navigation that we created previously. We can turn the navigation into a component itself by going and clicking on the component. We can hold Option to drag this out. So we have an instance, Command and X to cut that, and then move to the Notion AI and the text that we have, the hero text. We can highlight both of them, Shift and A to create an auto layout, and we can double click and rename this to section. And then we want to make sure that we have our navigation placed to the top. So here I can click on the section, Command and V to paste that. And as you can see, the section has the chip, the text, hero text. I can double click to rename this to hero, and then we have the navigation on the left side. So if I use the arrow on my keyboard, I can push the navigation to the top, and I want to basically give this whole thing a background. So here we have the section, we have the nav, but I don't want the nav to be part of the section, which is part of the chip and hero. So what I need to do is create a parent auto layout and move the navigation outside. So what I would do is click on the section again, Shift and A to create another auto layout, and double clicking and renaming this to body or container. In HTML, we refer to the most parent element as body. So we have body as the most parent element. We do want to make sure that the body has no padding. So we would basically reset all the paddings to 0, and we can control the body's width. In this example, for a desktop size, we can increase it to 1400 pixels, and we give this body a background color. In this example, we go to fill and then search for gray 100. And now you see that our website is beginning to shape. So what I can do is now I can click on the navigation bar. Here you see we have the body on the left hand side, and we have a section, and what I need to do is basically click and drag the navigation out to bring it to the body. And as you can see, if I take a look at the website that we just created, we see that the whole body is actually wrapping the navigation and the section, and the section here is wrapping the chip component and the hero. Also, what I need to do is if I go ahead and try to look at this, the navigation is not responsive. Here, if I try to resize this, the middle section is responsive. However, if I click on the navigation, I have to make sure I go to the width section on the auto layout, and from fix switch it to fill. Step 14. So I went ahead and I cleaned up our Figma project, and as you can see, I added another page called the website. Basically, this is the final layout of our website. And if I go ahead, for example, click on the navigation, here you see we have something called local instance. That means if I click on that, that would bring me to the main component. And as you can see here, we are navigated to the components page, and I also cleaned this page up. Here we've so far managed to create link, chip, and navigation component, and we are reusing this in our website. So if I go ahead and click on the website, here you see we managed to create our navigation in a responsive way. If I also take a look at the left hand side, we have the most parent element renamed as body, because in HTML the most parent element is body, and inside that we have a navigation, and then also we group the section with auto layout, again chip and hero. Also, as you can see in the auto layout, we made sure that it is set to center align to the top, and we made sure that the properties on the width is actually set to fill as well, because if you have this as fixed, and if I try to resize the body, you see the whole middle auto layout is not being responsive. So you have to make sure you select the section and then you click and make sure that is fill as well. And by doing that, you are now basically having a responsive website. Also, what we need to do is add a space between the navigation and the section. Step 15. So if I go ahead and visit the dev mode, if I try to look at this and closely inspect it, here you see we have a bit of a space here. And in the dev mode, you can always switch to pixel and rem. In this example, I do want to make sure that I go to the inspect settings and instead of rem, switch to pixels. This way I can inspect my website a bit better. Here you see we have 16 pixels of spacing between the Notion AI and our element here. And if I hover over that on the top, here you see we have only 10 pixels. So we do really want to have more spacing between our Notion and the text, as well as the entire section and a navigation bar. So let's just go ahead and do that. We can switch back to the design mode, and we can click on the section and increase the spacing from 16 pixels to 24. And what you notice is if I click the body auto layout and I take a closer look, here we have that 10 extra pixels of gap between the elements. So you can increase that to 48. By doing that, you make sure that any elements that you add actually has 48 pixels of gap between them, which means, for example, if I have another section in our body, I can simply click and Control D, and as soon as I duplicate that, you see there's a 48 pixel gap between all of the elements. Step 16. Since we duplicated another section, we no longer need the content within the section, the chip and the hero. We need to replace this with a testimonial. And what you notice is the testimonial is already an auto layout and is already being set to the horizontal direction. Here you see it is being set to horizontal, and there is a gap of 24 pixels between each of them. If I zoom in, we need to fix a couple of issues with this. First of all, we need to make sure that this is center aligned. So here, if I basically cut that testimonial using Control and X, click on the second section, Control V to paste it, we have our testimonial added. Also, we no longer need the chip and hero. So what I need to do is click on the chip and hero and delete that from my auto layout. Also, what I do want is here you see that we have this free for teams to try. If I use Shift and R, to bring the ruler, I can basically drag this out, and here you see we have this text starting from here, and what I can do is also drag this out here. It would be nice if we have all of the logos only take all the available space that we just dragged out, so this way our layout is more aligned. Moreover, we don't need the Notion logo, so what I need to do is click on the Notion logo, delete that, and making sure that if I click on the testimonial, it is center aligned, and by doing that we are almost fixing it. The other thing that I need to do is making sure it is center aligned from the middle as well, so it's not only center aligned to the top, center aligned in the middle. And by fixing these two values, we managed to now create a more consistent look. However, what you notice is if I again try to zoom in, for example, the Uber logo actually has a height of 48 pixels. However, if I click on the 1Password, it only has a height of 19 pixels. So this is not consistent in terms of the look and feel. So what we need to do is make sure that all of them have the same height. So this way they would be exactly center aligned. And in order for me to fix that, I'll click on the first image, which is Snowflake. And then here we see under the layout, we have a height of 24 pixels. So I would want to reduce all of them to 18. In Figma, you can use K to bring up the scale panel. And then here you see under height, I can just basically reduce that to 18 pixels and it would automatically reduce that. Since I fixed the first one, I would need to fast forward and repeat that for all of them. Here on the Toyota, I basically would select it, bring the scale panel using K, and then reduce that to 18. And then I can just repeat that, press K on my keyboard, do 18 pixels, step 17. So I fast forwarded, and as you can see, I also renamed all of these logos to their proper name so we have easier time identifying them. Also, if I click on any of them and press K on my keyboard, all of their height is now set to 18 pixels. So if I close this and try to zoom out, here we see that we are able to exactly reduce that. And if we want this to be perfectly aligned to the rulers that we just placed here, what we can do is select the testimonial and making sure we reduce the height. Here, as soon as we reduce the height, you see it exactly snaps to the rulers that we just created. If we don't have the rulers here, if I try to make it snap, it doesn't work. So I'm going to Command Z that to basically bring the ruler back, and then I would select the testimonial, and I want to make sure again it is set to fixed, and then by doing that it would automatically snap to the ruler. And instead of hard coding any values, I will click on the gap and I make sure it's set to auto. And after setting it to auto, it would exactly expand it all the way to the edges. Another fix that we need to do is basically remove the excess padding that we have around the testimonial. So we would click the padding and make sure we reset it to 0. And then as you can see, we have our testimonial created. Step 18. So if I hide the ruler using again Shift and R, now we managed to create our body, which has our navigation, our hero section, and basically we have the testimonial section. Also our section 2, we do want to add ends as well, and then our pricing. So if I go ahead and visit the starter, we so far managed to create the sections up top. We only have the toggle section and the other 4 cards to be created, and once we design that, we basically would add that to our website and we can see how finally our website looks like. You can also do final improvement. Basically, you can click on the text here, and since this is a bold text, you can reduce the amount of line height that it has. Here we are setting it to 61 pixels in font size, so for line height we can reduce that to like 64 pixels, and by doing that, if I zoom in, here you see that the line height is reduced. Also for letter spacing, I can click that and then reduce that to minus 0.5 pixels, and if I basically apply that, here you see that our text is being closer to one another. Because we are using a big font like 61 pixels, you should always reduce the line height and letter spacing. This way your font and typography looks more aesthetic. One other improvement that we can do here in the chip, it is not being stand out. Even though we have a different color, you can immediately tell the difference between these colors. However, it would be nice if we actually make the chip bold. So what I can do is select the chip, go and hover over the local instance, and it would bring me back to the chip component that we have. Finally, what I can do is highlight both of the text and make the font size a bit bigger to 14 pixels and make the font weight a bit bolder to semi-bold. By doing that, now if I go back to the website, if I basically try to zoom out, now we see that now with Notion AI has more emphasis. We can preview this in our browser by basically clicking on the body and making sure to go on the preview. Here we have 2 options. We can preview it using a quick preview. If I click that, you see now the preview panel appeared. So now you see I can basically resize the website and I'm able to see how it looks like. Also, what you can do is instead of preview, you can actually present it. And once you are brought to the presentation mode, here you see that it actually opens the entire screen. And what you can do is basically hover over that tiny settings icon and making sure you are previewing it as an actual size. But what you notice is the actual size is overlapping the screen. Here you see it's actually overflowing, so I have to do a bit of a scroll. So Figma has this built-in option. You can do it like a responsive view. And if I go ahead and do a responsive view, you see now we have our website created, and this is how we are seeing it in the responsive view. Again, the responsive view only works the best if you have everything built with auto layout. That's why we are emphasizing on building everything with auto layout, because what auto layout does is allows your elements to be adaptive and responsive. And since we go to actual presentation mode, this would give us most accurate representation of how it would look like if we build it using HTML CSS. Step 19. So in the previous videos, we managed to create the navigation section and also the hero section. We need to create the pricing page with the toggle. If I visit our Figma file here, we see that we have another section which is called pay by month and also pay yearly. If we take a look at our components page, we have our chips and link. So the way we would do that is we would hold option and basically drag one of the chips out. Now we need to detach this, so we will hold command and / right detach. Basically we would select detach instance, and for this one we need to have active and basically inactive. So for the active one, all we need to do is make this a white color by giving it 100% gray. Also, if we select the text, we want to make sure we select the primary 5. And then for the inactive one, what we need to do is bring this and remove the background color by again going to the fill and removing it. And then for the text color, we want to go with 94. Step 20. However, if we go with 94, it might not be visible when we add a background color, which means if we try to actually highlight both of them and do a shift and A to create an auto layout, we do want to go with the fill 94. So this is what we want at the moment. And as you can see, the text here is not visible. So what we need to do is add another color to our color styles. Here we have primary 94, so we would detach this and then we would click on our fill and then we would reduce that to like 85. And then as you can see, if I drag this out, 85 is still not as visible, so we can reduce that to 75%. Also from the font perspective, we do want to reduce this from semi-bold to regular. And now since we're happy with this, what we can do is add that to our color palette by clicking on the fill, add, and then style, and then just renaming this to primary /75, and then we would create that style. And now if we click outside, we need to double click on our auto layout and then rename this to toggle, change the direction from vertical to horizontal, and making sure instead of fixed, we go with hug. And we would select both of the chips. Here on the left hand side, we have the toggle, so we would select both of the chips, and then again from fixed, we would select hug. And then as you can see, our toggle is growing. What we need to do is also round the toggle and add more padding. So in this example, we need to click on toggle, and as you can see, the padding is 0, so we would only give it 8 pixels around. So we would click and give it 8 pixels, and then from the appearance, we would just max it out to create a toggle shape. And then once we're done here, this would be our active toggle and this would be our inactive. Step 21. So we need to create 2 component set out of this and then nest it inside the toggle, which means I need to basically drag this out holding option and drag this out as well. So this would be our toggles. Highlight both of them and then command / to create multiple components. And then once I create multiple components, I would combine them as variants. And for the background color, I do want to choose the toggle background color, which is primary 94. So here I would click on that, go to the fill, and then select primary 94 because this is the background color I want to use for my toggle. So here I would just rename this to toggle. So I would basically move the toggle around and then bring it close to the other components that I created. And what you notice is they are very similar in terms of the component property. So what I can do is instead of me clicking on the toggle and renaming the property, you can always click on the previous components that you have. In this example, if I visit the layers panel and I collapse the pages, we see that we have purple set to true and then purple set to false. So if we repeat the same process for the toggle, if I close that and visit the toggle component, I can create that true and false value. So I can basically double click, copy the value, go to my toggle, and then just paste that there in both of them. And then if I do that, and now if I click on the toggle here, you see my toggle is actually renamed to purple property. So there's 2 ways you can actually assign variants, either renaming your layers this way or actually using the variants panel. However, in this example, I don't want this to be purple, so I can double click instead of purple, call this active, and I want to make sure that the white one is set to true because this is the active one and the other one is set to false, which is the inactive one. Also, if I click on the chip component and I click on the master one, here we see that we have a label, which is all lowercase, and it is linked to the text here. So what I need to do is double click to copy the label, exactly the same name, click on my toggle, and then hover over the properties, click the plus, and then go with text. And then this way I would just copy paste that label all lowercase, and then I would just give it a value of default for now. Once I create that text property, here Figma gives me an error message that this is not being used in the toggle component. So what I need to do is select the text in both of the toggles and navigate to the typography section and click on that tiny icon to apply. And then this way, as soon as I click that, I would automatically link it to the label. And now if I take a look at the left hand side, you see the layer panel under the toggle. This is exactly the same thing as the chip here. If we take a look at the chip here, we see that we have purple false and purple true. If we take a look at the link, we have black false and black true. So we are repeating the same pattern. I would collapse all the layers to have a clean layer panel to work with. Step 22. And now what I would do is I would just simply hold Option and drag this out, cut that, and then double click in the toggle and then hold Command Shift and R to replace that. So if I take a look at the toggle on the left hand side here, we see we have the actual toggle frame, and instead of auto layout we have a toggle instance. So I can simply delete the other one and then select the toggle, Command and D to duplicate that. And if I take a look at the toggle right now, here you see we have toggle which is active on both sides. So I can simply click on one of them and disable the active. So this way we can toggle between active and inactive. Once I'm happy with this, I can actually click on the toggle auto layout, cut that, and I go ahead and visit my website page. And then here if I zoom out and if I click on my body, here you see on the left hand side we have a navigation, we have a section, and we have another section. We need to duplicate that other section and then open that. Let me scroll down, click on the testimonial, delete that, and make sure to Command V and paste that toggle inside the third section. And if I take a look at the actual frame here, you see it actually is added after the testimonial, and we have default as our text. So all we have to do is basically copy the value, which is pay monthly, go with the actual default one, which is the first one, replace the label to pay monthly, and go ahead and replace the other one, which is pay yearly, with the other toggle by visiting the label and replacing the value here. Also, what you can do to make this a little bit stand out, because you want your users to pay yearly, you can simply double click, highlight that, go to the fill section. Since we have a tertiary color, we would basically highlight that, so this would stand out a bit more. This way, if I click outside, it looks better and users would click on it. Also, in terms of spacing, we would want to reduce the gap to 0 because we only would have one toggle active at the same time. So if I basically collapse everything, we have managed to design the section, so we can simply delete that. Step 23. So far we managed to create the hero section, and then we added our toggle. The final parts of this Notion pricing website is the cards. So if I navigate to the Figma file, I see we have 4 cards here. The first thing we need to do is we need to recreate a component, and then once we recreate that, we can replicate all of these using that same master component. So what I would do is I would highlight all of them, Command and X to cut them, and then go to the components page. And then here I just need to add one card. So what I would do is paste them here for now. And if I take a closer look at each card, I see that it is created using one image, and then we have our text, which is a button, the price, and the actual plan, and then some information about each card. So let's just go ahead and reduce the size of each image and turn them into single components, because we are going to use instant swap to switch between each card. So what I would do is I would hold Option to drag each image out of the cards here, and then by doing that, I can now turn each of them into a component and use instant swap to swap between them. Also, what I need to do is to reduce the size from 80 pixels to 40. So I would press K on my keyboard, and then here we have the scale panel. So here on the height, I would just type 40, and I would repeat the same process for all of them. Step 24. And then as you can see right now, I reduce all of them to the height of 40, and I would select all of them and hold Command and / to create multiple components. And then after selecting create multiple components, here we see that we have our components created. It makes sense to actually rename them based on the card. So if I go ahead and take a look at this, this is basically the image that is going to be used for the free. And then if I go to the second one, this is the image for the plus plan, and then this is the image for the business one, and then finally this is the enterprise image. So I would basically go ahead and double click on each of the components and exactly rename them based on the card's plan. So we finally managed to rename all of them. We can select all of them and combine them as variants. By doing that, we can go to the variants and then combine them And then here we can just rename this to icons, give it a background color. And then here you see it automatically renamed it for me. So here what I would do is double click on the variants and then rename this to plans. And then here you see we have the settings, so we can click on that and organize the values from free to plus and business and enterprise. And by doing that, if I basically hold option and drag one of them out, I have the ability to switch between the different plans, and this way I can switch the images. So for my card, we have the first part done, which is basically having the icons as components, and the other part is actually giving this card a background color with some padding and border radius. Step 25. So what I would need to do is basically have one of my instance icons out, hold Shift and A to create a auto layout, and then go to the fill section and select 94. This way we have our background color selected. I also want to make sure the width is not set to hug, so I would basically switch it to fixed because I do want the width to be basically dynamic as we nest them inside another auto layout. So here I would double click and rename this to card. On the paddings, I would just make sure it's 24 pixels of paddings across. And then in terms of radius, I would just give it 12. If I take a look at our card here on the auto layout, it's being displayed in a horizontal direction. So I need to switch it to vertical, and then press T on my keyboard or the text and click inside the auto layout, and then just basically type in title. And then if I click outside, I would go to the typography section, and for my title I would go with 14 pixels and I would give it bold. I would hold Command and D to duplicate that, and then for the price I would increase the font size to 30 pixels or 32 pixels in this example. And then here I would just give it price. We also want to make sure we use the same colors, so I would hold Shift and select both of them, the title and the price, go to the fill and make sure I select the 5. And then finally we have another text and another button. So if I take a look at this, we have the plan and the price, and then now we need to add the button and the text. So for the text, it's going to be fairly simple. So what we need to do is click on the title, duplicate that, move that to the bottom using auto layout, and instead of bold we would reduce that to regular because these are going to be bullet points. So we can double click, just for now rename this to bullets. And then finally, if I go ahead to my links, here we have our links, so I can hold option and drag this out, and then as you can see we have our links. So what we can do is simply drag it and place it between the price and the bullets. So we have our card almost ready. What we notice is our link is actually only displayed in black and the off-white color. So the off-white color, if I switch it to that one, you see the background color is not going to be visible. Step 26. So we need to have another variant to basically make this white because we no longer want to detach this instance and override it using basically gray. And as you can see, as soon as I do that, this is the button that I want to use. However, if I click on my local instance, I don't have that here. So what I need to do is basically expand the variant set and then just drag it out, click on one of them and click plus to add another variant set. And right now I need to update the variant values. So for this one, I need to basically go to the fill section and just change the color to white. And also I need to make sure on the variant panel, we only have black. So we need to change this to the basically type, or we can change this to theme. And then for this one, you can make sure to select white. And if I go back to the previous one, you can select off-white in this example. And then for the first one, you can select black. And by doing that, now I added another button to my links component. Also, I can click on my component and go to the resize to basically resize the variant set. Now I can go and visit the card. Here I can click and make sure I click on that 3 dots and reset everything. And once I hover over the reset, it tells me, do you want to reset everything? And yes, I do want to reset everything, because once we reset everything, we now can select the correct component without actually overriding it. So here we have off-white. So we can simply go with the white component, and this way we have our card ready. Step 27. So what we need to do right now is basically click on our card, and we make sure to create a component out of this by clicking on the create component. Also here we see that there is a 10 pixels of gap between all of them. What you can do is you can group all these images together and then add some space between them, which means I can simply select the pricing. Let's just go ahead and collapse the pages. So I would select the pricing, the title, and the actual icon, add another auto layout inside our auto layout card, holding Shift and A, and then here I would just rename this to top. And I do want to make sure it actually fills the container, because if I don't do that, it is not going to be responsive. So here, instead of hug, I do want to make sure I select fill. Also, I have to make sure to select the title and the price, and make sure instead of hug, they are set to fill as well. By doing that, if I simply drag one card out, and if I start typing, here you see it automatically wraps to the next line and the entire card gets expanded. So this way I can simply increase and decrease the size without worrying about the text being overflowed. Also, I need need to repeat that for the bullet. So here I can select the bullet and I want to make sure instead of hug, I set that to fill. And then finally, I would select the default link, which is the theme of white color. And I want to make sure on the auto layout, I set that to fill as well. And if I go ahead and visit the master component, I would select the top one. And right now, instead of 10, I would want to reduce that to 4. This way I am grouping all these elements to the top. And now I can select the top parent card, and instead of 10, I can add 16. So this way, by adding 16, I am able to group the elements to the top and add some space between the cards. Step 28. Finally, all I have to do is click my card, and then here we have another property, which is nested instances. The reason we have this property available to us is because we are linking another instance in our component. Not only link, we are actually putting our icons inside our card component, which means if I go ahead and select my card instance, here you see on the right hand side, I don't have the ability to switch between the images. I also don't have the ability to switch between different themes of the link. So I have to make sure to go to my card, go to the plus, and then do nested instances. And by exposing the nested instances, I would make sure to select icons and links. And then here, as soon as I do that, you see on my card, I have icons and links exposed. So right now, if I go ahead to my instance, you see right now I can actually switch between different images. Here, as soon as I switch that, the image gets updated for me. Also for my link, I can switch between different colors. We do want to add text property as well. So if I go ahead and select the title, I do want to make sure to go to the typography section, select that and add title. And then for the value, I would just leave it as default, create that. So we have our title created and also our price. We would go ahead and create another text property, rename that to price. We can leave the default value as 0 for now. And then finally for bullets, we select that, go to the typography one and add another text property and rename this to bullets. And also for this one, we would just give it default value for now. So if I go ahead and zoom out, we have our card created and all I have to do is basically copy paste the values to my instance card. So for the free one, I can simply select my instance and then here on the right side, we see that we have title, price, and bullet. Also, we have the local instances. So the first thing we need to do is we have to make sure to select the business and go to the free one to select the correct icon. And for the title, we would go and type in free. And then for the price, we would just leave it as 0. And then for the actual link, we would just rename this to sign up. So since we renamed this to sign up, we need to now copy paste the bullets. So what I need to do is basically select the bullets here, Command and C to copy it in my clipboard and make sure to paste it with matching style, which means if I right click here, we have the option to paste and match the style, which is Command Shift and V. So if I do that, basically holding Command Shift and V, I would paste the value and the bullets would exactly get the same styling of the master component. And all I need to do is basically go to each bullet here in this example, the first one, and then add a dash and a space to create into a bullet point. And if I repeat that with all of them, I am able to create bullet points for each of them. So I fast forwarded, and as you can see, we have our first card instance created. Since we built this with auto layout, I can simply resize this and you see everything is being resized correctly. However, what you notice is the bullets are a bit cramped together. So what I can do is I can basically click on local instance and I'm brought back to the master component. And then here on the default, I would select the bullets and I want to make sure instead of auto, I would have like at least 22 pixels of line height. And by doing that, if I now navigate back to my cards, I see that I have a bit of a space between my bullets. Since we have this as a master component created, all I have to do is hold Option and duplicate that and simply change the values on the right side. So if I basically drag this out here, instead of free, I would go with plus, and instead of 0, I go with $10. And then here plus is a popular plan, so I can simply switch that to a black link. And then by switching it to black, I can rename this to get started. And then for the image, I can simply switch it to plus as well. And this is how easy it is for me to switch between different card components and nest components inside one another. And all I have to do is basically do the same thing, highlight over all the bullet points that I have on the plus, Command and C to copy, and then I would just basically navigate here, select all of this, Command Shift and V to paste that. And then as you can see, it actually preserved the style here for me. So I'm going to fast forward that and make sure I recreate the business and enterprise as well. Step 29. So after fast forwarding, we managed to recreate all the cards using one single master component. So we no longer need these wireframe cards that we created previously. So I'm going to delete that. Also, I would be highlighting all these cards, Command and X to cut them from the components page, because in the components page, as you can see, we only have the master components, which is the navigation and card and the icons that we just created. And I would go ahead and visit the website, collapse the pages, and as you can see in the website, we have the layouts ready. So I would click anywhere on the canvas, Command and V to paste them. And if I go ahead and drag them in the website, as you can see, they would get stacked like that. And this is not the behavior we want. So I'm going to Command and Z again. And before dragging it to the website, all I have to do is highlight all of them, Shift and A to create an auto layout. And then as you can see, we have frame 1. So I would rename this to section to be consistent with the website that we have. Now, if I go ahead and drag this, everything works as expected. I would use the arrows on my keyboard to push this down. So I would go ahead and make sure that I select fill. And by doing that, the master section, which is the parent auto layout, is spanned across. And if I go ahead and click on the body here, you see if I try to resize this, the cards are not being responsive. So I need to select the parent auto layout. I'm making sure to select wrap. As soon as I select wrap, you see the icon is changed, which means if I now click on the body and I try to resize this, the auto layout cards are being stacked, which is exactly the behavior I want. Also, if you take a look at the left hand side here, we see that the wrap icon is different, which is different than the normal auto layout icons. However, if I try to zoom in here, you see we have inconsistent sizings in terms of the card height. It would be nice that all of them have the same height. So what I need to do is select the parent section and making sure I select all the children's. And here we have again the content set to hug. So here all I have to do is from the hug, I would just make it fill. Step 30. As soon as I select fill, you see all the cards expand and they have the exact same height. However, the alignment is a bit off. So if I try to zoom in here, the business icon and the enterprise icon, they're not aligned properly. Same thing with the free icon. So all I have to do is basically select one of the instances, hover over the local instance to basically get navigated to the master component card. And here you see we have the auto layout, which is aligned to the left center. All we have to do is align it to the top left. And then here I can click on return to the instance. And now if I try to zoom out, I see that all of the cards are aligned accordingly to the top left and the height of them are equal as well. Now if I try to test it, if I try to zoom out, here we have the body. I now go ahead and try to resize this. You see it is being wrapped. However, you notice that as we try to wrap them, the cards are not being wrapped properly. So what I need to do is making sure that I select the parent section, and instead of fixed, I would set it to fill as well. So this way our children cards, all of them are set to fill. Our parent auto layout section is set to fill. And then finally, the body is set to fix in terms of height. If I click on it, here you see that we have the body set to fixed height. So right now, if I try to click on the body and if I try to resize this, you see the auto layout children elements are being resized. So basically what I can do is try to resize them accordingly based on the breakpoint. For example, on 1600 pixels, we are good. And as soon as I try to make it a bit lower, which is 1000 pixels, we have to increase the height of this. So we would basically bring it down. And this is how the height of the auto layout card would be adjusted. The other thing that we need to pay attention to is basically center aligning this and adding some space on the left and right side. So if I go ahead and select the parent auto layout section, on the spacing, which is left and right side, I would just add a 96 pixels of padding. And then finally, I would center align them by clicking on the top center. Also, what I notice is if I, for example, click on this, here we see that the width of the card is set to 288 pixels. We can set a minimum width for each of the cards. For example, we want all of them to be a minimum width of 290 pixels. By doing that, if I, for example, try to resize this, you see as soon as they get resized, the second card doesn't take all the available space. However, if I go ahead and select all of the cards and set a minimum width on the auto layout by selecting add minimum width, and then I go ahead and select 290 pixels. And then on top of that, I would go ahead and select the width, and instead of fixed, I would make it into fill. By combining minimum width and fill container, we're able to adjust the available space in each card, which means if I click on the body and if I try to resize this, they resize back to the 4-column layout. If I try to make them smaller, they resize to 3-column and 1-column. If I again try to make them smaller, they would resize to 2-column layout. Same thing if I try to make them a bit smaller on one screen, they would resize to a 1-column layout. So this way, with only using fill container and minimum width, we were able to create a responsive behavior. Also, if you take a look at the prototype, we were able to see how our cards are being presented, and we managed to create the Notion pricing page. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more design tips and tutorials, and let me know what you think in the comments down below.